He was a single father, living in a rundown house, working odd jobs just to raise his son. No degree, no spotlight, just surviving. Then one morning, he saw a truck broken down by the road and an old man standing alone. He stopped, helped. No questions, no thanks needed. To him, it was nothing. But the next morning, 3 black SUVs showed up at his door. And what happened next changed his life forever. Welcome to Grateful Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. The morning sun rose slow over Thomas, Georgia, a quiet town, half forgotten by the world, but still hanging on porch by porch, field by field. Ben Carter stood in the kitchen of a house that leaned just a little too far to the left. The floor creaked under his boots as he sliced a bruised apple. Each piece dropped gently into a chipped cereal bowl. Across the table, a 5-year-old boy swung his legs in mismatched socks. His name was Logan. His eyes were bright, awake before the world was. And to him, Ben Carter wasn't just a father. He was everything. Outside, the roof still leaked from last week's rain. A bucket waited in the hallway to catch the next storm. But inside, the heater hummed, the coffee brewed, and a lunchbox sat packed on the counter. Ben didn't complain. He didn't know how to. That wasn't how he was raised. He'd once been Sergeant Carter lead mechanic for the 1st Armored Division. 3 tours overseas, a chest full of ribbons he never wore, and 1,000 nights he never talked about. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was keeping food on the table and getting Logan to daycare before 8 a.m. His hands moved slow this morning. Not from age, he was only 36, but from years of wear. Grease still lingered under his nails, calluses thick from hauling busted engines and patching fences that should have been replaced a decade ago. He looked over at Logan, who was watching him closely the way kids do when they don't know what to say, but know something's heavy in the room. "You okay, Dad?" Ben smiled faintly. "Yeah, buddy. Just tired." Logan nodded, like he understood, even if he didn't. They left the house just after 7:30. The truck, a beat-up Ford older than some of Ben's tools, coughed to life like it didn't want to. He muttered encouragement to the engine, like it was a friend who just needed a little push. Logan giggled in the back seat, juice box in hand. The morning was cool, dry. The kind of day that made you think maybe things were turning a corner. They dropped off a delivery of soil at Henderson's nursery, 20 bags in the bed of the truck, barely held together with bungee cords and prayer. Ben didn't mind the work. It paid just enough to keep the lights on. Some weeks, barely that. As they turned back toward the highway, Logan dozed off in the back, head resting on the seatbelt. That's when Ben saw it. An old truck, hood up, parked crooked on the shoulder, steam rising from the radiator like a white flag, and beside it a man, tall, gray-haired, in a mud-stained coat. He wasn't waving, wasn't pacing or flagging traffic. He just stood there, still. Ben slowed without thinking, one hand on the wheel, the other already reaching behind the seat for his tool bag. "Hang tight." "Buddy," he told Logan gently. The boy stirred but didn't protest. Ben pulled onto the shoulder and stepped out. The Georgia sun was climbing now, washing everything in soft gold. The man didn't speak, didn't even look surprised to see someone stop. He just nodded once. Ben popped the hood the rest of the way. "Corroded terminals," he muttered. "Timing's off too. This truck's older than me." Still no reply. "Name's Ben," he offered. Reaching for a wrench, the man gave another slight nod. No small talk, no thanks. Just presence. Ben didn't mind. He'd spent enough time around old soldiers and stubborn farmers to know some folks carried their stories so deep, you only heard the echoes. Half an hour passed. Sweat beaded on his brow. Dust clung to his knees. He worked in silence, methodical, focused. That's when a voice cut through the quiet. "Fixing some stranger's truck while your own roof's still leaking, the neighbor." Mr. Dobbs, same man who once said Ben should cut the Army Act and start charging full price for everything. Ben didn't respond. He just kept working. Because Dobbs didn't get it. Some folks measure life in status. Ben measured it in service. From the truck, Logan watched his father wide-eyed. To him, this wasn't just about spark plugs and belts. This was something bigger. After 40 minutes, the engine coughed, then rumbled to life. Ben closed the hood. "She'll get you home," he said, wiping his hands. For the first time, the man spoke. "You didn't ask my name." Ben shrugged. "Didn't need to, but I won't forget your face." The man looked at him for a long moment, not just looking, reading. Then he climbed into the truck, nodded once, and drove away. Ben stood there, dust in his eyes. He didn't know why the moment felt heavier than it should have. Didn't know why the man's silence lingered in his ears longer than Dobbs's insults ever had. He turned back to the truck, where Logan sat waiting, juice box empty. "Do you think he was somebody important?" the boy asked. Ben smiled faintly. "Didn't matter. He needed help. That's all I saw." That night, after Logan was asleep and the dishes were done, Ben sat at the kitchen table listening to the hum of the ceiling fan and the distant croak of frogs outside. He thought about the man's eyes, calm, composed, like he wasn't just broken down, but waiting. For what? Ben didn't know, but somehow he had a feeling this story wasn't over yet. Because sometimes helping a stranger on the side of the road isn't just a good deed. Sometimes it's the start of something much bigger, something that might just come knocking tomorrow. Morning came the way it always did in the Carter household. Soft, quiet, ordinary. The kitchen light buzzed above the table. Logan munched toast with his usual sleepy focus. Ben stood at the counter, slicing apples with the same pocket knife he used for half the jobs around the house. The heater clicked and hummed, trying its best to hold off the November chill seeping through the windows. And then, a sound, low at first, a deep, synchronized rumble that didn't belong on their street. Ben paused, knife hovering mid-slice, tires on gravel, then brakes, then silence. He moved to the window, pulled the curtain back a few inches just enough to see 3 black SUVs, parked perfectly in a line. Government plates, tinted windows. Not a siren in sight, but they didn't need one. These vehicles didn't announce. They signaled. Ben's brow furrowed. His gut tightened. Daddy, Logan asked, "Is it someone bad?" Ben shook his head slowly. "No, buddy. Just unexpected." He stepped out onto the porch, barefoot, dish towel still over his shoulder. The grass in the front yard was patchy. The porch steps groaned as usual. He felt suddenly exposed, like the whole world had turned to face his house. From the middle SUV, a man stepped out. Tall, silver hair, civilian clothes, but military posture. Behind him, 2 others followed, clean-cut, alert, suits that didn't wrinkle. The tall man approached slowly, measured, confident, the way only someone used to being in command ever walked. Ben held his ground. Years of military service kicked in without needing permission. The man reached the bottom of the steps and offered a nod. "Mr. Carter, my name is Lieutenant Colonel Samuel Whitaker, retired, formerly with Joint Special Operations Command." He held out a folder. Inside, a badge, credentials. Ben glanced at it, then back at the man. "We're here on behalf of the Veteran Personnel Outreach Division," Whitaker said. "Someone you met yesterday would like to speak with you." Ben didn't answer. His mind had already started turning over every worst-case scenario. Had he missed something on a background check? Was this about his military records? His benefits? Custody? Then the rear door of the center SUV opened, and Ben saw him, the man from the side of the road. Only now he wasn't wearing a mud-stained coat. He wasn't silent or still. He wore a crisp gray blazer, boots polished, posture that didn't waver, same eyes, same presence. But now everything made sense. The calm, the silence, the stillness that felt like it held history. The man stepped forward and extended his hand. "Ben Carter," he said, voice firm. "I'm General Nathaniel Caldwell, retired, former commander of operations in Afghanistan, advisor to the Department of Defense." Ben's mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. "You fixed my truck yesterday," Caldwell continued, without knowing who I was, without asking for anything. You just helped. Ben swallowed. Yes, sir. I saw a man who needed a hand. Caldwell nodded. Exactly. A long pause passed between them. Then the general motioned toward the house. May we come inside? Ben hesitated, only for a second. Of course, he said. Inside. Logan peeked around the hallway, wide-eyed. Caldwell knelt to his level, a faint smile softening his face. You must be Logan, he said gently. Your dad's a good man. Logan blinked. He fixes stuff, like everything. Ben chuckled under his breath. He led the guests to the kitchen table, clearing away the breakfast dishes. The chipped bowls, the worn placemats all suddenly felt small. Caldwell sat down. So did Whitaker. The others remained standing, silent but watchful. Ben took his usual seat, still unsure what this was or why. Mr. Carter, Caldwell began, resting his hands on the table like it was a battlefield briefing. Yesterday, you did more than repair a vehicle. You demonstrated something we've been searching for in veterans across the country. Ben said nothing, just listened. Character, Caldwell continued. Discipline, integrity. You stopped for a stranger with no title, no name, and no promise of compensation. You acted on instinct and on principle. He reached into his coat and slid a sealed envelope across the table. And because of that, I'd like to offer you something. Ben didn't touch it. What kind of offer? A new program, Caldwell said, Veteran Technical Corps. We're building it from the ground up, a federal initiative focused on infrastructure support, power grids, water lines, emergency vehicles, communication systems, everything this country depends on and rarely sees. Ben leaned back slowly, still guarded. I don't have a college degree, he said. No certifications. I fix tractors out of barns. I'm nobody special. Caldwell shook his head. That toolbox in your truck. That's your resume, and everything you've been through, that's your degree. Ben looked down at his hands. Calloused, scarred, strong, but tired. We need people like you, Caldwell said. Veterans with real-world grit. Not just engineers, problem solvers. Men and women who don't flinch when the pressure's on. He tapped the envelope once. Inside, you'll find a full offer. Training schedule, benefits, housing assistance, a tuition voucher for your son when he's older, and a role that's more than just a job, it's a mission. Ben stared at the envelope. All the nights he'd sat in the dark, wondering how to stretch one more paycheck. All the mornings he'd looked at Logan, praying he'd never have to see what his father had seen. And now this. Why me, Ben finally asked. Why not someone with the right credentials? Caldwell's voice dropped to a near whisper. Because credentials don't show character. And yesterday, I staged my 14th roadside breakdown. You were the first person to stop. Ben blinked. You staged it. I needed to find someone real. Not rehearsed, not polished. Just someone who still lived by a code. The kitchen was quiet. Even Logan, playing with plastic dinosaurs in the next room, seemed to sense the weight in the air. Ben looked again at the envelope. Still untouched, still sealed. He reached out slowly and picked it up, turned it over, held it like it meant something more than just numbers and terms. You've got 48 hours, Caldwell said, rising from his seat. Training begins in Atlanta next month. You'll be home on weekends. Ben stood as well. Caldwell extended his hand. Ben took it firm, steady, a handshake between soldiers. Oh, and bring your tools, Caldwell added with a faint smile. Day one's a hands-on assessment. Ben managed a small smile back. That I can do. As the SUVs pulled away and the dust settled on the gravel road, Ben stepped onto the porch and looked down at the envelope in his hand. For the first time in years, he wasn't afraid of what came next. He didn't know where this road would lead, didn't know how hard it might get, but he knew this sometimes. The world doesn't reward you with money, or medals, or applause. Sometimes it just knocks on your door and gives you the chance to matter again. The training center in Atlanta was nothing like Ben expected. No push-ups, no war games, no barking drill sergeants. Just a room full of men and women with weathered faces and tired hands, mechanics, medics, drivers, linemen, veterans, like him, each carrying their own version of the same story, years of service, followed by years of silence. The Veteran Technical Corps wasn't just a program. It was a second chance not to fight, but to build, to restore, to matter. And for the first time in a long time, Ben didn't feel like he was just getting by. He felt like he belonged. The first few weeks were hard. The technology had changed since he left the Army. Sensors where bolts used to go, control panels that looked more like aircraft cockpits than tractors, digital schematics, remote diagnostics, cloud-based repair logs. Ben hadn't taken notes in over a decade, hadn't touched a classroom since high school, but muscle memory was strong. And discipline, the kind forged in deserts, in motor pools, was even stronger. He stayed late, asked questions, listened when others spoke, and when it came time to get under the hood, to lay on the concrete floor and trace a leak by feel alone, Ben didn't just perform, he led. Other trainees started turning to him without thinking, asking how to recalibrate a pressure valve, how to troubleshoot a failing generator in the field. By month 4, instructors weren't just grading Ben's work. They were offering him mentorship tracks, team lead positions, a pathway into federal infrastructure operations that hadn't existed before. And through it all, Ben stayed quiet, still drove his old Ford, still called home every night to read Logan a bedtime story over the phone, still sent half his stipend back to Thomas, Georgia, to cover daycare and groceries. 6 months later, the call came. Washington, D.C., a congressional committee on veteran workforce development. They'd heard about the pilot program, seen the early data, but it wasn't the charts and bullet points that got their attention. It was a name, Ben Carter, mechanic, father, veteran, a man who stopped for a stranger and unknowingly helped launch a national initiative. They asked him to come, to speak. He didn't want to, said he wasn't a public speaker, said he didn't own a suit. But General Caldwell called him directly. Ben, he said, this isn't about the suit, it's about the story. So Ben went. Logan helped pick out the tie, a navy blue clip-on from the clearance rack. The hearing room was bright and polished, lined with long desks and nameplates, senators, aides, reporters in the back with cameras and notepads. Ben's palms sweated through his sleeves. But when they called his name, he stood up, adjusted his collar, and walked to the microphone. The room went quiet. He looked down at his prepared remarks, 3 pages, typed neatly by a program assistant, then looked up and folded them. Good morning, he said. My name is Ben Carter. I'm a mechanic, a father, a veteran, and until 6 months ago, I was holding my life together with duct tape and grit. He paused. I didn't come here today with policy ideas or statistics. I'm not a lobbyist. I'm just a guy who fixes things. And I want to tell you what happened when I stopped to fix a truck on the side of a road. From there, he told them the story, how we'd seen an older man standing beside a steaming engine, how he'd pulled over without knowing who he was, how he didn't ask for a name or a reward, how that one act of decency led to the knock on his door, to this program, to this moment. I wasn't trying to be noble, Ben said. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I just saw someone who needed help. And I think that's the point. He looked around the room, and there are thousands of veterans across this country who don't need a handout. They need a way back in. They need someone to notice that just because their resumes are a little dusty doesn't mean their character is. He let that sit. The kind of silence that isn't empty, but full. You want to fix our power grids, our water lines, our supply chains. Start by looking for the men and women who already know how to fix things. And maybe, just maybe, stop making them prove they're worth saving. He stepped back from the microphone. The room didn't clap. It wasn't that kind of event. But you could feel it. A shift. Measured. Heavy. Real. That night, C-SPAN aired the hearing on public access. By morning, clips had gone viral. Veteran groups shared it. Trade schools reposted it. Mayors and state reps began asking how to start their own version of the program. Within weeks, 3 more states had signed on. By the end of the year 10, Ben Carter never asked for credit. He didn't want his face on posters, turned down interviews, declined a book deal. I didn't fix that truck to be remembered. He told one journalist, I fixed it because someone once fixed mine. Back in Georgia, he still lived in the same small house. The roof was fixed now. His fellow trainees helped reshingle it after graduation. Logan's school had better books. They shared a simple dinner every night, grilled cheese, soup, whatever fit the budget. But something else was different. Ben walked a little taller, slept a little easier, and when he passed that old bend in the road where the truck had once broken down, he didn't just remember the engine. He remembered what started that day. Not a promotion, not a paycheck, a turning point. Proof that doing the right thing, especially when no one's watching, can still change everything. It didn't happen overnight. Change never does. But after Ben Carter's speech reached Washington and then the rest of the country, something began to shift. Slow, steady, quiet, like a door creaking open that had been stuck for years. States from the Carolinas to Nebraska began launching their own versions of the Veteran Technical Corps. Cities rewrote infrastructure contracts to include skilled veterans. Trade schools built fast-track programs designed around real-world experience instead of degrees on paper. Suddenly, the question wasn't, what can a veteran do? It was, what can't they? And right there in the heart of it all stood a man with oil-stained jeans and a name no one had known just a year ago. Ben Carter, not a politician, not a CEO, just a father who showed up every day, no matter how tired he was. In Thomas, Georgia, people started noticing. The same neighbors who once ignored him, the ones who whispered about his peeling paint and his patched roof now slowed down when they passed his house. Some stopped to say hi. Some dropped off groceries when they heard Logan was sick. And one afternoon, a truck from the local power department showed up unannounced to install new lines, free of charge, no explanation, just a quiet nod from the supervisor who stepped out and said, "We appreciate what you did, Mr. Carter." Ben didn't say much. He never did. But he offered a handshake, firm, honest, and that was enough. Even Dobbs, the loudmouth neighbor who once sneered from his porch, went silent when 3 Army Corps trucks pulled up one weekend to help repair Ben's fencing. The soldiers weren't there for a headline. They weren't there for a paycheck. They were there because they had heard about the guy who never asked who you were before helping. And to them, that meant everything. The town started to change, not in big, flashy ways, but in smaller ones. A new bench installed outside City Hall with a plaque that read, "For those who fix what's broken, even when it's not theirs." A local school began hosting Mechanic Mentorship Mondays, where veterans taught kids how to repair small engines and wiring systems. Ben came once a month, always with Logan at his side, because by then, Logan had grown, still young, still wide-eyed, but older now, wiser. He'd started to ask the hard questions, not the kind you find in textbooks, but the ones that catch in your throat. "Dad, do you ever wish someone else had stopped to help that truck?" Ben looked at him one evening, the sun low behind them, casting long shadows across the yard. "No," he said quietly, "because if someone else had, we might have missed everything that came after." Logan thought about that for a long time. And then he said something Ben never forgot. "We help because it's right. Not because someone says thank you." Ben didn't cry easily. But that one got him. By the end of that year, Ben was offered a regional director position within the Veteran Corps. He turned it down, not because he didn't believe in the mission, but because his mission was here, at home, in Thomas, where stories like his were still being written every day. Instead, he stayed on as a field coordinator. He trained new recruits, drove across county lines to inspect job sites, taught local contractors how to see past resumes and into character. He didn't need a title. He just needed the work. Most evenings, He came home just after 6. Logan would be on the porch. Homework spread across the same table they'd eaten peanut butter sandwiches on for years. Sometimes they'd talk about school. Sometimes they'd talk about engines. But every now and then they'd just sit, side by side, no words needed. One of those evenings, cool air, pink sky, smell of fresh cut grass still lingering. Ben sat with his boots crossed at the ankles, elbow resting on the rail. Logan brought out an old envelope, worn, edges curled. "The one General Caldwell gave you," the boy asked. Ben nodded. "Yep, never threw it out." He took it in his hands again, turned it over the way you might turn over a photograph that changed your life. "It's strange," he said. "This little thing, it started everything." Logan leaned against his shoulder. "You gonna frame it?" Ben smiled. "Nah, some things aren't meant to be put behind glass. They're meant to be remembered." And he did remember. The truck, the silence, the handshake, the question no one ever asked him. What if no one notices? And now he knew the answer. It didn't matter. Because the act itself, the kindness, the pause, the repair, the principle, that was the point. He looked out over the field beyond his fence. The same field that once looked like a dead end. Now it looked like promise. Logan tapped the envelope gently and asked, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you didn't stop?" Ben looked over at his son, eyes full of future. "No," he said, "because I did." They sat there a little longer. The light faded, the porch creaked, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, reminding the world that it was still turning, still being held together by people who show up when no one's watching. Because not every hero wears a uniform forever. Some hang it up, pull on a pair of old jeans, and keep doing the right thing, even when no one knows their name, even when no one sees, even when it's just a man kneeling by a broken-down truck with a little boy watching quietly from the window. That's where the real change begins. That's where legacy lives. And sometimes that's enough. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way, often in the quietest places. Not everyone who helps wants recognition. Some just need to know that today, someone isn't going hungry. And sometimes, that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to Grateful Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.